So what is authority? What does it mean, authority? There are many so-called authorities on earth. There are many voices and many institutions claiming to be an authority. Does that necessarily mean that it is an authority, or that it's just making a claim to be an authority? At the human level, authority exists only when those subject to it recognize it as legitimate. Without recognition, power may still operate, but it ceases to be lawful and it becomes coercion. So, for example, right, a government's legitimacy comes from the consent of the governed. But if that consent, if that yes to the government is obtained through deception or coercion, then the government loses its lawful standing. It's not a lawful authority. It's a deceptive authority. It's a forced authority. So at the legal level, here on earth, under international law, authority derives from peremptory norms. This is the highest form of law on earth that binds all states and all systems. These norms, this law, it defines what is universally lawful. And we find out such things as the recognition of being, apart from any construct, the freedom of conscience, the freedom of thought, the freedom to be free from subjugation. That's what peremptory norms expresses. And that's the legal obligation that it places upon the state party. And any authority that contradicts them, any authority that denies them or goes against them, is void ab initio. That authority is invalid from the start. At the existential level, authority ultimately flows from truth and being. That's where authority comes from. Recognition of truth. That's what gives rise to moral authority. While denial of truth breeds control and false hierarchy, a false authority. And this is how the governments of the world are operating right now. They're operating as a hierarchy, as an authority, but they're using force upon human beings to force the human beings to recognize their authority. Force in law, force in fines, force in penalties. They're using force in order to coerce recognition of their authority. And ultimately, their authority is not recognized by the international order because domestic law violates peremptory norms. Domestic law violates the being, violates your being, violates your inalienable rights, and therefore, by default, the authority of the domestic government is of no force or effect. So the real hierarchy of law looks like this. It starts with being. It starts with you and me. And it starts with recognition. Recognition of our inalienable rights. Recognition of our rights that we have naturally because of being. And that those rights produce law as found in the peremptory norms, as found under the universal order. And that law is an authority. It's a lawful authority. And according to their own written documents here on earth, no one has the right to violate that authority. No one has the right to violate that law. No one has the right to violate recognition. And no one has the right to violate your being. Once that authority departs from recognition or departs from truth, then it becomes mere administration. It's no longer a lawful authority. It's just an administrative body, a government body a system, and that system is forcing compliance. That system is forcing obedience. It's not serving law. It's not serving justice. It's not serving the being anymore. So when a being, for example, follows a religious doctrine, a church, a religious teaching, and that human being recognizes that teaching as authority and believes that teaching as an authority, even though it's not an authority, the religious teaching is against the being. It's against peremptory norms. But in the consciousness of the being, that being recognizes an authority. So all the Muslims, they recognize Allah as the authority. All the Christians, they recognize Jesus as the authority. What's happening there is not authority, but it's a recognition of authority in error. The being's act of recognition, the human being that is recognizing this and declaring this and believing this is real, but the object recognized is false. It's not derived from truth. It's not derived from consciousness or peremptory law. It's a teaching. It's an authority. It calls itself an authority, a religious doctrine, a religious movement, and claims it's an authority. And the human being, through active recognition, gives power and authority to this structure. The act of recognition, the operation of recognition, this is lawful by nature. This is part of our being. It's part of who we are. A being has the capacity to recognize. This is part of our inherent dignity, part of our consciousness. It's an operation of our consciousness. But that ability to recognize, recognition itself is neutral. It's an awareness, right? But it's neutral. So it can be influenced. It can be controlled because it's neutral. Recognition can be misdirected. See, when recognition is turned toward a doctrine, a church structure, or a system, or a belief that violates peremptory norms, that violates the being itself, by claiming dominion over consciousness, by claiming dominion over life, by claiming dominion over thought, then the being's recognition empowers the illusion, not truth. The being's recognition gives power to the structure, power to the system. It's the being itself, the human being itself, that is holding up the structure and the system itself, not truth. The being is lending power to that which really has none, because the structure itself is in violation of law and should not exist. But the being keeps it alive by its recognition. Recognition carries force. The false object, a religious institution, a belief in a book, a dogma, a government hierarchy, it begins to operate as if it had lawful authority, as if it has the right to operate. Yet its foundation remains void. It possesses only the appearance of authority, not the essence of authority, because its operation is directly against the universal order, directly against your being, directly against inalienable rights, directly against peremptory norms, and therefore is void. And the authority is not recognized and shouldn't be operating. But the human being, the man and the woman who recognize these systems, give the systems the power they need to continue to operate. once a being reclaims their awareness and aligns recognition with truth, with the universal order, with consciousness, with peremptory norms, with inalienable rights. Once they stand in that recognition of their own being, then the illusions collapse around them. Because authority reverts to its lawful state, that coming from the man or the woman, not the systems around him. Recognition is grounded in truth, not in subjugation. Because right now, most human beings are living their life under an authority of subjugation, an authority that forces obedience, that is coercive in its power, and exists only because the human beings recognize it. But when true recognition comes, and the human being understands that they are the lawful state, not the government state, they are, and their inalienable rights, and their freedom of consciousness, and freedom of thought is the lawful ground, and places an obligation upon the government bodies to respect them, and not to create laws that limit and abridge them. And the governments are under obligation to follow peremptory norms, which recognize your being, and they are not doing it. But their authority stands today in 2025 because they get recognition from the beings that are living on earth. So yes, beings on earth, men and women on earth, are recognizing, they are recognizing false authority all over this earth. But that authority has no true standing. It exists only through misdirected recognition. Because these authorities are violating the universal order. They're violating your being. They're violating inalienable rights. They're violating peremptory law. And by such, they're of no force or effect. They're an illegal construct, and they have no right to stand anymore. But through false recognition, through misdirected recognition, the authority continues to operate. So in reality, authority is not coming from the system. Authority is coming through the actions of men and women. Authority does not originate in the system. It is channeled through the men and women, through the act of their recognition to the system. Systems themselves have no inherent life or authority. They are simply structures of thought, administration, or language. Only a being possesses consciousness and the capacity to recognize. To recognize. The moment a human being recognizes a system, law, or a leader as having authority, that recognition transfers power. Not because the system deserves it, but because the recognition created it. It animates the system with the appearance of legitimacy. The system doesn't grant authority to beings. Beings lend authority to the system. Without our continual recognition, the system's authority dissolves, revealing it was never, ever, ever autonomous. It was only upheld by belief and compliance, which was obtained by coercion and force. When recognition aligns with consciousness, with peremptory norms, and with truth itself, authority becomes lawful and just. Because authority flows from that capacity, not from a construct. When recognition aligns with deception or coercion, authority becomes false and void ab initio, void from the get-go. Authority flows through the being, not from the system. The system only borrows it temporarily through recognition. Now, the flip side to this is that true authority, a real authority, does not act or exist because others recognize it. That's called the mirror principle. A true authority exists by truth of being, not by recognition. Recognition may acknowledge it, but it cannot create it. You see, false authority depends on recognition to exist. It needs belief, it needs submission, and it needs compliance to sustain its illusion, to sustain its power. When recognition is withdrawn, when recognition is removed, it will collapse because it never had inherent being, it never had inherent power. But true authority, this exists independently of recognition. It operates from the nature of truth, from the nature of conscience, from the nature of universal order itself. Whether beings see it or not, its authority remains. It's constant, immutable, and self-evident. The act of recognition doesn't grant power. It restores harmony. When a being recognizes true authority, they realign themselves with reality. They're not empowering the reality. They're not empowering the universal order. That order has always been in operation, but we have failed to recognize it. Recognition can sustain illusion, can sustain a false authority, or recognition can reflect reality. But only one of those flows from being. Authority, a true authority, always stands in defense of something, not in domination of it, but in protection. Its existence has purpose, not possession. Authority serves. And we hear that, right? Many people say, oh, the government's supposed to serve the people, a servant of the people. That's right. That's what authority is there to do. You are correct. Its function is not to command for its own sake, but to preserve order aligned with truth, protecting life, protecting conscience, protecting thought, protecting choice, protecting justice, protecting the natural harmony of being. That's what authority is there to do. Not coerce, not control, not force. Authority holds position as a steward. That's the very definition of authority. A trustee of something beyond itself. It doesn't own what it protects. It safeguards it so that right order can be maintained, so that truth can be maintained. When authority ceases to protect, when it exploits, when it coerces, when it deceives, it nullifies itself. Protection is not optional. It's the very proof that the authority is real. Not because it's recognized, but because of the fruit of its action. Because what it's doing, whether cosmic, moral, judicial, its defining trait is preservation. Preservation of being, of conscience, of the integrity of truth. Without protection, Authority operating without protection, it's simply administration. It's simply an administration without purpose. It's tyranny. It's control. It's coercion. It's force. Why? Because it's not an authority. It's not protecting the being. It's not protecting the inalienable rights, not protecting natural rights, not protecting peremptory norms. And therein lies the big difference, right? That true authority always protects, and false authority always possesses. And authority, it doesn't operate under magical principles with magical fairy dust. True authority isn't symbolic and it isn't mystical. It's not sustained by belief, by ritual, or charisma. True authority is operative, meaning it must act. It has to act to preserve what is right. Once an individual possesses authority grounded in truth, that authority obligates action. To recognize the need for protection and then fail to act is to forfeit legitimacy. That's the obligation that authority puts upon that which recognizes it. Authority implies intervention because protection, right, requires engagement. True authority doesn't merely approve or observe, it intervenes to restore balance, to correct injustice, or prevent harm. Inaction in the face of harm is abdication, not neutrality. It's giving up the authority because of failure to exercise it. The intervention of real authority is never arbitrary. It is compelled by the nature of what it protects. For example, if life or conscious being is being violated, authority must move to shield it. Authority that does not act, it ceases to be authority. Authority calls for action and intervention. It's not an abstract title. It's not an abstract power, a coercive power, but a protective power. It's an active duty of protection.